At Prime Minister's questions in Parliament on Wednesday, Boris Johnson was steadfast. He would not resign, despite a swiftly growing list of resignations by his top officials. A day later, Johnson stepped out of 10 Downing Street and offered his resignation, bringing to a close his 3-year tenure at the top, one filled with scandals and some successes. I want to bring in Baroness Camilla Cavendish, who ran Prime Minister David Cameron's policy unit and is now a columnist for the Financial Times. Camilla, welcome. I want to ask you first whether at some level this is the theme of Boris Johnson's career seems to have been enormous political skill and virtuosity, but marked by what I suppose one politely would call dissembling. He got fired from his first job at the Daily Telegraph for dissembling about a quotation he made up. He dissembled about Brexit. Lots of the anecdotes and facts he presented were simply not true. He dissembled about Partygate. And now it seems like he dissembled even to his own cabinet about what he knew about this latest controversy. Was it that that people just finally lost the trust in him that you need?
Well, he was a revolutionary, and in government, he has never been able to switch from essentially campaigning to governing. And this is really the tragedy of Boris Johnson, actually, is he continued to be interested in headlines and, as you say, to dissemble, mainly sometimes on quite trivial issues and sometimes just to pursue his own agenda. But ultimately, I'm afraid it's all been about him. And that's what happened this week. The penny finally dropped, and it was, funny enough, there was, the issue that was the last straw was the dissembling over a man who appeared to be a sexual predator who had been employed by Johnson, who Johnson knew about. But as you say, this was only one of a very, very long series of things which ministers had had to defend. So many of the people who finally snapped on Monday and Tuesday and went to him and said, "You've got to go," were people who have been out on the airwaves for a year defending all sorts of things that then turned out not to be true. And they'd had enough.
So looking forward, the Conservatives still have a huge majority from 2019. Many people point out it would be hard to lose that majority in one election. In other words, the Conservative Party could be looking to another 6, 7, 8 years of ruling. Is there some figure who can bring the various factions together, particularly the ones that had been so at odds over Brexit?
The coalition that Boris Johnson built, you're right. The big question for the Conservative Party is, can anyone keep that together? I think really the bigger question is, can the next leader sort of smooth over Britain's relationships with its allies, begin to rebuild trust in politics, because trust in politics has been so damaged by all of these episodes, and also trust in some of the institutions. So there are a huge number of candidates who are going to run. There are several big figures. Rishi Sunak, who was the Chancellor, has declared that he will stand. Jeremy Hunt, who was Health Secretary and Foreign Secretary, ran against Johnson for the leadership and got to the second place last time and has been outside of cabinet. He will also run. And he's interesting because he's not tarnished in any way by the Johnson years.
Would it be fair to say that economically the verdict is in? Brexit has been bad for Britain economically, right? I mean, you have terrible inflation, which tends to happen because when you have higher costs of goods, higher tariffs because you left the European Union, slowing growth. Britain looks like not quite the sick man of Europe, but certainly the weakest of the major economies.
Yes, I mean, for a while it was hard to disaggregate the effects of the COVID pandemic from the effects of Brexit. I think we can now see, exactly as you say, that we are way behind in terms of growth. A lot of small businesses are really struggling to export. And we've got to remember that there were various possible versions of Brexit. Boris Johnson chose a very hard Brexit. He chose to leave the single market of the European Union and indeed the customs union. And I think the polls in England are showing that the voters are also realizing that this has not been a very good deal for the country.
What do you think at the end of the day his legacy is?
Look, I think he is a superb politician. He was a household name. People called him Boris. He was a great mayor of London. He has a way with words that he connects with people. His downfall really was that he appears to be a narcissist who even now actually can't accept why people want him to go. And that will really tarnish his legacy. But whatever you think about him, he did take Britain out of the EU. And he did create a very, very significant Conservative majority. And, you know, those things will go down in history. He also led the country through the pandemic. You know, for good or ill, every government had struggled with that. But that was a proper public service.
Is there any larger lesson in Johnson's fall about populism and what happens to, because he was a kind of populist, when you have to actually govern?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of analogies are drawn between Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. I don't like to overdo that. I think, he has played some of the same tunes, and he's been too obsessed with focus groups. And he's sadly been very divisive. In the pandemic, Britain really came together. People looked out for each other. We felt, I think, more connected than we've been ever since the Brexit referendum. He could have capitalized on that, instead of which he started fighting culture wars, trying to build division against the opposition. And as I said, that's because he was still campaigning. He was been in permanent electioneering mode. And I think the next leader has to be somebody who is much more serious about simply delivering good government for the country.
Camilla Cavendish, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.